ask people that, they're like, oh yeah, well, everyone who doesn't buy just says, it's too much money or I don't have enough time. I get that. But what's happening is your audience is saying that because they just don't want to get into all the specifics. Now, of course, there's in some cases, like it really is just out of their budget, and that's totally cool. But for a lot of people, they think, you know what? This sounds like it could work, but it's not going to work for me because X, Y, or Z. And the only way you're going to figure out what those X, Y, or Z things are.
Welcome to the Creator's Adventure, where we interview creators from around the world, hearing their stories about growing a business. Today's guest has grown her business to over 11 million in revenue, and she's going to share with us how she's done it. Hey everyone, I'm Brian McAnulty, the founder of Heights Platform. Let's get into it. Many have asked me what software I use to record such high quality video for this podcast. I use Riverside, and what's great about Riverside is it records the local camera feed from you and your guests around the world, which means crisp 4K video without having to worry about blurriness due to internet hiccups. Riverside is also a great editor, fitting with my philosophy of making it easy for yourself to create because there is nothing that your guests or you have to download. We also use Riverside's AI magic clips to find interesting moments for our episode intros. And I'm happy to announce that Riverside is sponsoring this episode. And if you sign up at creators.riverside.fm/creatorsadventure and use code creatorsadventure, you'll get 15% off. You can find the link in the episode description as well. Now back to the show. Hey everyone, we're here today with Caitlin Bacher. She is the CEO of Scale with Success, a company dedicated to teaching coaches and course creators how to turn their online course into a 7-figure business without launching. Her company has rapidly grown to over 11 million in revenue over the last few years with no signs of slowing down. Caitlin learned the hard way that there's more than one path to a successful business. After struggling with inconsistent revenue from constant course launching, she realized that she could opt out. Switching to a new approach, she automated course sales and quickly reached her first 1 million in 9 months. And now she shares this strategy with course creators globally. Caitlin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with you. So my first question, I'd like to ask everybody this, is what is the biggest thing that you did or you are doing that has helped you to achieve the freedom to do what you enjoy?
So it might be obvious, but the number one thing that I really did to achieve the freedom that I was desperately craving in my own life is to make the shift from selling my course with the launch model over to an evergreen model. Yeah, I want to get into this in particular here because for myself, I'm more of a software business founder than a course creator at this point, but I don't like launches. I like just continuing to build and then creating a system where the customers can come in so I don't have to deal with the anxiety and stress of putting it all into these big launches. But before that, so before you started your own company, Scale with Success, you were selling online courses using the launching method. So could you elaborate maybe on what launching entails and why you felt it became unsustainable for you? Yes. So typically launching requires around 2 or maybe 3 months of intense list building and content distribution where you are spending a lot of time and effort into building and nurturing an audience. And during that 2 to 3 month period, it's all leading up to what's called an open cart. And the open cart is that period of time where you are allowing people to enroll in your course. So it could last anywhere between 5 or 7 days. Then after the cart closes, after that 5 to 7 day period, nobody can buy your course until the next launch cycle begins again, which is maybe 4 months from now, could be even a year later, depending on how many times you launch throughout the year. So sometimes people do one big launch, sometimes they launch 2 or 3 times a year. Now, the problem that most course creators, including myself, found is that when their launch ends, so does all of the excitement and interest they'd been working so hard
to generate for their course. And it's a period of radio silence until the launch cycle begins all over again. Now, this is a very high risk way of selling your course, especially for newer course creators who are making less than $1 million a year and probably have a tiny team or no team at all and a really tiny budget. One of the things that I'm always preaching is that if your course is currently generating less than $1 million per year, the number one thing that you need to focus on is generating consistent revenue so that you can really start to get some traction in your business. Like, every plant needs water to grow, every business needs revenue to thrive. And putting all your eggs in one basket with a high risk launch model did not work well. I would say it's a recipe for disaster, but here's why I don't want to say that, because I know that there are some people who absolutely love launching and it works for them, and that's totally fine. But for me, it was a recipe for disaster. And I can think of one launch in particular where I pretty much spent $20K up front on creating all of the assets that I needed for that short open cart period, producing all of the content, paying for ads up front, paying for various contractors who were going to help me execute the launch, because at the time I didn't have, a full-time team of my own or anything like that. And so I spent $20K up front on the launch for that course, and you'll never guess how much money I made. Do you want to take a guess?
It sounds bad. So, I don't know, $5,000?
Okay, so I made $20K, which is
Okay,
not,
well, that's good.
it's not
At least you broke
terrible,
even.
right? It's not terrible, but if I'm spending $20K up front and I'm earning $20K, then there's nothing left over to pay myself. And because my business was operating at the time off of a launch model, I didn't have another promotion scheduled until like 4 months from then. And so there was basically no money for me or my family, and that created a really big problem. And I'm sure that many of your listeners who are using the launch model to sell their courses have found themselves before in a similar situation. And so that's when I really started exploring different avenues to generate consistent revenue. I looked into running a membership. That sounded like a complete nightmare to me. I did not want to be responsible for creating brand new content every single month. And so what I really wanted to do is focus on how can I sell this? How can I go all in with selling this one course? And at the time, that course was all about how to start and grow a Facebook group. How can I go all in with this one course and generate consistent revenue from it? And also keep in mind that I didn't have a big team, had no money, had some money for ads, but nowhere near, a big ads budget that a lot of people have. And so,
well, I think that going through that process of a launch, in some ways, like, you can learn a lot from it, but it kind of goes against a lot of the things that are great about being a course creator. Because if you want to have this online course business, you don't have to spend money up front to create it. You don't have to like order products or manufacture things. And there's a lot of ways that it's a lot easier to try something and get that feedback. But with a launch, you have to put a lot into it. And even if you're not going to invest so much in ads or hiring contractors, you're putting in, at the very least, a lot of time, only to then find out afterwards, oh, well, now that I did that, I realize I really messed up here, here, and here. But it's going to take another maybe 3 or 4 months before you even get to try again. And for a beginner course creator, I think usually like that's not something that you have that kind of time, because you're trying to get some kind of result from your business, as you said, so you can start to support your family and grow from there. But I'm curious, let's take like the devil's advocate would say, well, to me, launches sound great, because if right now my course is just every once in a while somebody trickles in and I'm barely getting sales, the launch is going to let me build up the hype and get everyone to buy it. So if that's the case, what would you say to someone who's kind of in that position right now?
Yeah. So what I want to start by saying is that again, there is more than one right way to build a business. So if launching is working for you, and I know there are some people out there that just like love it. They love all the excitement of it. It's like they just feel like they're in their element doing it and it's working for you. Awesome. That's fine. But what a lot of people struggle with is shifting from that launch model into an evergreen model because they're bringing the same mindset that they use launching, and they're trying to execute an evergreen strategy using that same mindset. And so when they find them, so they're creating situations for themselves where they are having a slow trickle of sales, right? With that evergreen funnel. And one of the things that there's two things that I've seen that kind of lead to that. One is that they're taking what worked well live and they're just repurposing all of that content into an automated funnel, right? And they're like, well, okay, I got my evergreen funnel up and running. Like, we're good to go. This worked great live. So I know it's going to work great in automation. And every time I see people do that, they find themselves in a situation where they get a few sales initially, right? And then the low-hanging fruit is gone. And then they're left with that trickle of sales and they're like, what's going on? Oh, I guess this means that my audience will only buy in a launch. I guess this means that Evergreen doesn't work for me. When the reality is the buyer's journey is so completely different from being in a launch to being in something automated, that it's not that Evergreen doesn't work for you. It's the content, it's the strategy that you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So then what's the solution? What's the difference in strategy to approach that? Because also, like, I agree, if you do enjoy launching, if it is working for you, the beauty of this kind of business model is there are so many ways you can do it. There is no like one right answer. If you like memberships, if you like Evergreen launching, like, it all works. You just have to figure out what works for you.
Exactly.
But okay, let's say we don't like launches. We want to go into figuring this out. What has to change in the mindset, in the marketing and everything to deliver that right?
So I always tell my clients that you have two jobs as a CEO. One, manage your emotions, and two, measure your results. So the mindset piece of this is that when you're in the launch mindset, you need everything to work perfectly for that very short open cart period. And if it doesn't, you're screwed until you get to then, read your data, look at it, and then 4 or 6 months later, try the whole thing again, try to learn from your mistakes. If you bring that mindset to an evergreen method, you're going to end up giving up way too soon. So it's kind of like when you're running an evergreen funnel, you need to approach it almost with the mindset of a scientist, that you're just there to experiment, right? And that is very difficult when you have money on the line. So I totally get it. And in no way am I saying, like, oh, it's just put on your, scientist cap and have this experimental mindset. But what you need to make sure that you're doing is reminding yourself that the goal is consistent improvement over time. And so as long as you are measuring your results, you're tracking your KPIs, you're looking each week at, what is one thing that I can shift or change within my funnel that's going to improve the output, that's going to improve the conversion rate. Let me experiment on making a shift to that one thing. And sometimes that one thing is really small. It could be the title of your webinar. It could be an email subject line. And once you make that shift, then you run it for a week and see what the results were. If things improved, great. Then you move on to solving the next problem. If things do not improve, then great. Now you know that way doesn't work to fix it. So you try a different webinar title or a different, email subject line. But just having this idea in your head that you don't need to put so much pressure on yourself to have it work for this one, the first 5 days or whatever, because the better it gets, the better it gets. So it's all about consistent growth over time. And that is a really, really big mindset shift, because so many people are in this. It's like they're in the habit of operating as though they're in a sprint instead of operating like they're running a marathon.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right that people go into it from thinking like, okay, I had the launch and then I waited this long until the next launch. And that's when I tried changing things. But when you're going to take this evergreen approach, you want to create that constant feedback loop for yourself. And like I enjoy that part about software. I think really any kind of creative business, it's you want to create that feedback loop for yourself as quickly as possible. And so in this case, it's like finding out like what marketing works and resonates with people and then constantly tweaking that. It's like that's the same reasons that why you want to like try pre-selling your content and like get it in front of people first to like find out if they have questions and what they think about it. Yeah, I like that. So what happened for you then when you decided that you wanted to shift and then go into not having these launches?
Yeah.
What was the moment where like it clicked and what do you feel like you figured out that allow you to change it and then suddenly become so successful?
Well,
At least it seems like relatively suddenly, where I think a lot of people, it would take a while for them to get to where you got.
yeah. So a couple things. The first problem that I really had is that I had just joined at the time a mastermind that was all about launching. And so almost everyone there was excited about launching. Like the person who ran it was awesome at launching. And so I went into that thinking, okay, I'm going to keep like this launch was bad. I'm just going to get better at launching. And there was this one guy in that mastermind. He was super, super quiet and unassuming. Nobody really talked to him, but he was selling a $297 course all about how to declutter your home. And he was making over $300,000 per month, every month, just from selling that one course. And he was without launching. He was just selling it evergreen, consistently making sales every day. And that was really the first time where I realized that there wasn't even an alternative to launching, because I just didn't know. I just thought, oh, this is just what we do. Yeah, it's hard, but whatever. And so once I saw that was the beginning when things started to shift, right? And so then I remember like bringing that up in the mastermind, being like, hey, why don't we do it this way? And the host was awesome. And he was like very open. He was like, well, tell me how that would work. And, he was open to it. But other people were like, no, Caitlin, you should just stick with launching, like da-da-da, whatever. And so I was like, no, I really want to try this, because the more I thought about it, the more it just made sense. Like I would be able to eventually grow my team over time. It's almost like I'd be creating this flywheel where I'd be making money consistently, and I could take a portion of that money and then reinvest it back into my business. And I could do that on a consistent basis, not just kind of, in bits and pieces throughout the year. And so once I learned that, I was like, okay, I've got this. I created a plan. I got to work, and my plan was a big flop, and it did not work at all, because I was literally taking things that I had done live, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to like package this into here, like whatever. And it wasn't resonating with my audience. The marketing message, like I found myself where I was speaking more to the points of what I felt like they should want about the course, as opposed to what they actually wanted from the course. And because of that, it was like I was constantly kind of talking under them, around them, over them, whatever. And it was creating this misalignment. And so people were not buying. And I remember I found myself in this spot where I was like, so what's it going to be? Am I just going to give up on this whole like evergreen thing, go back to launching, which also wasn't the best for me? Or am I just going to push through? And because I knew personally that one guy who had did it, I didn't know anyone else that did it. For all I knew, like maybe it only worked for decluttering courses or whatever. But just because I knew that one guy, I was like, man, if he could do it, I can do it. Like, at least I know it's possible. I don't know how to get there yet. I'm not really sure of like the road. And there was for sure a lot of trial and error involved, but every week I would sit there and optimize and improve. And it was just like really becoming that scientist and having that outlook where I'm here to run an experiment. If this doesn't work, what's next? What's next? What next? And just really focused, like blocking out everything that everyone else was saying around me and just focusing in on that. And the cool thing about Evergreen is once you find that thing, that connection and like messaging that makes sense between you and your audience, then it's like the growth becomes vertical, right? So it's like you have a lot of kind of like up and down, like flat period. And then once that latches on, then it's just like, you know, zooming off.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as like the scientist approach, like for those watching or listening, like that's the right approach, but you don't have to think like, oh, well, I'm not a scientist, I can't do this. Like it doesn't have to be that complex. It's really just doing something and then in some way, whatever way that is, measuring how it worked or not. And I like the point that you mentioned about like realizing like you were talking all around and over and under the audience in the beginning. Because I'm thinking of this, we just recently did a live workshop with Abby Prendergast, and she helps people also with like this method of not having to do these launches. And what she mentioned was that for the copy, the way you can be analytical about it, but not having to be like a scientist per se, is that look at what they're actually saying. Like, what is your audience actually saying in like a review or a post or somewhere online? And then just literally use like the problem that they describe in your copy. So then you don't have to worry about, am I speaking to them the right way that they will understand this? Like you're literally saying the things that your potential customers have said, and it can kind of connect a lot better.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, like, would you say there's anything else specifically in like the language or the approach that should differ between Evergreen and launching? Like, was it really just that constant iteration that helped you get closer and closer until it really took off? Or do you think like if you were going to take everything you did now and say, now I want to switch back, or I want to try doing a launch for this product, would you have to change that messaging again? Or did the Evergreen like refinement that you've done make it easier for you to launch now if you want to?
So that's a hard question because I don't know. Like, I don't want to launch again. So, like, the thought of it makes me break out in hives. But one thing that I think, aside from, you know, the iteration, there's one additional thing that I did that was manual work, that wasn't just like, oh, just automated or whatever, that really helped. And I think that this is one thing that would help whether you're doing live launches or Evergreen. And that is to get on the phone with everyone who didn't buy and to ask them a series of questions to figure out why. And I totally get it that, you know, whenever I ask people that, they're like, oh yeah, well, everyone who doesn't buy just says, you know, it's too much money or I don't have enough time to do it. And I get that, but what's happening is your audience is saying that because they just don't want to get into all the specifics. Now, of course, there's in some cases, like it really is just out of their budget, and that's totally cool. But for a lot of people, they think, you know what? This method sounds awesome. This sounds like it could work, but it's not going to work for me because X, Y, or Z. And the only way you're going to figure out what those X, Y, or Z things are is to get on the phone with them. And so that's one thing that we have actually built into our own funnels, is that afterwards there's a survey that goes out for everyone that didn't buy, and we follow up with people and email them back and say, hey, can we actually get on a phone call? You know, because the needs of the market do shift over time. And that's another thing to keep in mind when you're doing Evergreen, is that you don't just set it up once and then forget about it forever, right? Because the demands of your market are changing. And so if you have something in place, like some kind of follow-up survey where then you can get on the phone with people and be like, hey, so like, what have you tried before? Why do you think that didn't work? What are you planning on doing next? Why do you think that's going to work? And you're asking those kinds of questions, you're going to find out so much information that you can put in your marketing. Just like Abby said, imagine being able to then say like, and I get it. I know right now you're thinking, well, I'm just going to try this, you know, this other thing. And they're watching and they're like, what? How did you actually know I was thinking that? And it's because you're just using their words.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that point about getting on the phone because that brings up like another risk of doing a traditional launch that you might have a super successful launch. 3 months later, you go and do another one and it kind of flops. And then you realize, oh, well, actually, something shifted a little bit in the market. But you don't get to find that out until you kind of messed one up.
Yeah.
And with Evergreen, you can constantly refine that. And you're right. Like people will say, oh, I don't have time, I don't have money. But if you're on the phone with them, then you can just go one little step further and say, well, if this happened, like if this would happen, then this would get you that result, right? Like why would that not make it worth it to figure out the time or the money part? And then like that small little thing can get them to reveal something, even like unconsciously. They may really, it's not that they're holding back and they don't want to talk to you. They may not even realize it for themselves until you ask them that. And then they say, well, I don't believe this would work for me because of that, or I'm worried about this other thing. And now you can correct your marketing. So yeah, I think it's super important to get on the phone and talk with customers. Too many creators approach this of, oh, I want passive income right away and it's all going to be automated. But eventually you can get to that point where you're doing less of that and you have a greater separation of your time from what you're doing. But I think it's so helpful to talk with people, especially in the beginning. And like, it's not really like a sales call or something. It doesn't feel bad to talk with them. It's a great experience to talk with them often. And it's super helpful to help you actually understand and move a lot faster instead of wondering why things aren't working.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to shift a little bit then and just ask kind of like courses in general. From your perspective, what would you say is like something that distinguishes like a course that kind of fails from one that achieves a significant success? Is there like specific factors or strategies that you would say make the biggest difference?
So I really think the number one difference between, a course that fails and one that makes millions is really connection. And I can use that specific example that I had where I was talking around or over or under my audience and I wasn't connecting with the specific problem that they were having. And I think that as course creators, we are in this business because we are creative, we have a vision of what we want to create, and because we know a lot about whatever niche we're in, sometimes we want to jump ahead and start and talk about solving kind of those root cause problems that people are experiencing, right? So people are aware that they have certain symptoms, and their main concern is getting those, well, I call them symptoms, what they're calling them is problems, getting those problems solved. And so if I'm able to speak to solving those problems, then they can connect with me and we're able to move on to the next step and so on and so forth. But because I'm able to see that what I call superficial problem, that symptom, and say, oh, I know what's really going on. It's all this stuff down here, and this is the really juicy and exciting part for me. So I'm going to put all this root cause stuff inside of my top of funnel marketing, and I'm going to like attract all these people and da-da-da, but it just goes over their head. They don't get it. You have to speak to problems that they're actively aware that they are experiencing. You shouldn't need to convince someone that they are experiencing a problem, right? And I see that happen a lot. I've done it myself where I'm like, oh, so, for example, with the Facebook group course, I was wanting to focus on profitability, but they didn't care about that. They just wanted an engaged Facebook group. So here I am being like, no, you don't want engagement, bad, profit, good, and they're like, no, like we want, because in their mind, if they had engagement, they would make money. And what I saw time and time again was high engagement and people not making any money at all. So I had to change the way that I was talking about my program, and so that I can really build that connection. And another way of thinking of that connection is kind of like, it's almost like a golden thread. So it's that golden thread that connects your product to your marketing, to your sales, to the delivery, to the product. Like it just kind of goes around and around. And when you're selling Evergreen, you're competing for attention from people on so many fronts, not just your competitors. You're competing with attention from what that person's gonna cook for dinner tonight, when they need to pick their kid up from school, what their boss told them the day before. Like you're competing for attention on so many fronts. And so the beauty of Evergreen is that over time, that golden thread becomes brighter and stronger, and you can connect with someone and bring them through that whole process, even though, all these other things are going on in their life. But that takes time, and it's definitely not gonna, I don't care how many launches you've done, it's not gonna happen the very first week that, you go Evergreen. And that's okay, because it's all about getting better over time.
Yeah. I think that's a skill that happens in a lot of marketing and content creation, even more nowadays. Like I'm thinking of YouTube, for example, and I'm by no means an expert of this on YouTube, but I know like there's a lot of times where you have this idea for a video or content that you want to teach people or show people, or a story you want to tell, but you can't just like make the title about that thing necessarily, because that's not what people know about or care about or are searching for. So you've got to package it in a way that this is the thing that they're looking for, and then the way you're presenting that solution connects to it, but it's actually not the same thing. So it's not intuitive to you as the creator, because the first thing that comes to your mind of what you're literally trying to say and how you're going to fix their problems, like your example, the Facebook group, I'm going to help make you profitable. Like, isn't that great?
Yeah.
That's not exactly like the pain point that connects to them of how they would actually get to that content from you in the first place. But once you can connect it, it can really get strong.
And kind of with that top of funnel content, whether it's the title of your YouTube video or the content of the YouTube video itself, that's really meant to educate people about their problems so that they understand what their problems are, why their problems are happening, common mistakes that are made, all of that kind of thing. And then once they sign up for your funnel, once they get into your funnel, then they're going to be gradually over time introduced to, and this is my approach to solving your problem. And here's what makes my approach, different and unique and all of that. And sometimes people get overexcited and they start talking about all of that in the top of funnel content. And again, it's just like whoosh, way going over their heads.
Yeah. A way I like to think of it is like constantly looking at every piece of marketing or communication with the customer and thinking from the customer's eyes, like, why do I care about this at this point? Because you as the creator, you have all this jargon and things you want to talk about, but your customer's not at that level with you necessarily yet. And so you have to get them to a point where eventually they will be. But if they're not yet, you have to understand what they currently care about and make sure you're speaking to that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what do you feel are maybe some myths that there are about creators hearing about building like a $1 million course business? Because I think like what you said earlier, seeing that example of somebody doing the Evergreen strategy, like being able to see that was enough for you to realize this is possible. Mm-hmm. And I know that especially probably people who have watched or listened to this podcast, like you've heard stories of other creators who are really successful. But I still think people tend to actually underestimate the possibility of what they could achieve and think like, oh yeah, there's one or two people that are pretty successful, but I guess I could get to this point. And like, yeah, it depends on what you want. But I think people are not aware that like with what they have to teach, even if it's not maybe a specifically like money making skill or something, mm-hmm. you can build like $1 million business from that. Yes. So what would you say about the kind of myths around that?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of the reasons why I think people believe that is because people like me are out here talking about how much money we make. And the reason why we talk about that is because I'm teaching people how to make money. So I have to make sure that people understand that I have made money for myself and I've helped my clients make money. And that's why I'm talking about. But what they don't see is all of these, regular everyday people out there that have these multi-million-dollar per year course businesses, memberships, and they're selling things like how to play guitar. Like these are things that my clients have literally taught and made millions from. Pilates, how to play guitar, how to needle felt a portrait of your dog. That was a real specific course, but she made a ton of money from it. Gardening, like all of these little things. Now, you're never going to find that person on the internet telling everyone, hey, I just made $300,000 this month from my decluttering course, because there's no point to them doing that, right? But they are absolutely doing that. And the cool thing is about other markets like that, outside of the, how to build a business niche or whatever, is that a lot of times the cost to acquire a customer through that is much less than it is to acquire a customer for your course about how to create a course or whatever it is, because it's competitive out definitely.
There. Yeah, the kind of like make money online niche is super, super competitive compared to many other things. And yeah, I can attest to that as well. I think as an entrepreneur, like you're being targeted by like people like yourself who are trying to teach you how to make money. And so, yeah, you don't see the other side of it, but I always feel bad when I see somebody online and they're saying like, oh, this is just some like grifter on the internet trying to sell me this thing about how to make money. Like, yes, there are a couple people out there like that, but there's actually so few people that are actually like that. Most of them, like they are truly experts. If you're spending all this money on advertising and doing all these things, like you've been really successful at what you're doing. And the reality is like, I get to see like firsthand, I have thousands of customers creating courses, and I can't think of anyone where like I'm talking with my support team and like, oh, there's that person. They're like the total grifter, always trying to trick people.
Right.
I cannot think of a customer that we have like that, but I can think of countless examples of like all these creative courses that are about things you would never imagine that could even be a course, and people are really successful. So hopefully we can instill some positivity and belief that it is possible for you, even if you're watching and listening to this and you think the thing that you're interested in is actually this niche topic. You still could have a lot of potential with that. I got a couple more questions for you. My next one is, what do you think are like, what trends do you anticipate like in the online course industry? What do you think is going to be different in the next year or two, and how do you believe that will impact creators?
So that's a good question. I think that one of the big things that, year after year becomes more and more important, especially as more people enter the online course space. Like, people talk a lot about, oh, this is like the online course is such a great growing industry and there's so much opportunity. And that is also true. And it's true that there is a lot of competition because more and more people are entering the space. And I think that the more people can lean into really showing up as themselves online and not feeling like they have to, have this like a specific online personality, and they can just kind of show up and be themselves. Like people now, because everyone is online, they're very perceptive and they can kind of tell if someone is being disingenuous, if they're watching, even if they're just watching like a little 1 minute, video on Instagram or whatever. And I think it's normal when you're first starting out to kind of look to other people and be like, oh, like I want to model myself after this, or like the way this person talks or the way this person behaves on camera. And I think that's just like a normal part of, learning anything new. But the more you can let go of that and really connect with just being yourself, like people will see that, and it's just like it's so magnetic. It's so interesting. Like I remember when I was first starting to sell courses, this was like way back in the day with like Periscope. So for any listeners that don't know what Periscope is, you really missed out. But anyway, so what happened is Periscope was one of the first platforms where you could go live, right? And so people were doing that, and I just remember it was so refreshing. Like I would just show up live, like in my sweatpants. I'd be running around with my daughter. I'd be doing whatever. And I'd be like, oh, like, let's look at your, at your this or at your that. And like, let me give you some helpful tips on, this or that or whatever. And I think that when you look at now, even things like, TikTok or some of those Instagram Instagram stories where people kind of open up and share a little bit more of their kind of day-to-day life. I think people just really resonate and connect with that. Like you don't need a big fancy video setup. You don't need all kinds of equipment to make this happen. It's really you and the light inside of you that's going to attract people, and people don't need to get caught up in making things super aesthetically perfect right from the start. Like over time, like yes, you'll eventually hire someone to style your shelf or whatever, as I have done, but you don't have to start with all of that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and super important, not only as there's more competition and people online, but also with AI. Like people want to see authenticity. And I always feel bad, like we're an AI course platform in the sense we've got this AI assistant and AI coach that we give to creators. But specifically, like all these AI features that we have, it doesn't write the course content for you. I always feel bad when someone sends us an email and says, well, can it now do all the course content for me? And say, no, because the reason people are going to buy it is your unique message and like who you are.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're connecting with. And the beauty of that and how it connects to this kind of business model is you really can just be yourself. Yeah. And if people don't see you anywhere online and it's kind of like, well, what is this? I don't know if I should trust this. It's not like you said, like the early days, if you think of like when email newsletters first became a thing, like if you had an email newsletter, you were emailing people and you had something for them to buy, it was like, well, no one else is doing this. This is kind of cool. Okay, I'm going to buy this person's thing. But now everyone's doing that. And if you don't see anywhere like to indicate who that person really is online, then it's a lot harder to connect with them and trust them. And so no one cares if you're the biggest expert in the world at that thing or the most professional. They just want to see who you really are. So I love that advice.
Yeah. We had one of our clients was in talking about, like creating courses or creating content from your own unique lived experiences. She was a housekeeper for many years. She got really good and really fast because the more houses she could clean, the more money she could make. So she had it down to like a science, a real system. So she actually took that system, she packaged it into a course, and then she sold it to busy parents who wanted to figure out a system. They didn't want to hire, someone else to clean it for them. They wanted to figure out how to clean their house. And she made millions of dollars from selling this course. And the reason why people connected with her is because it was all based on her experience. It wasn't created, like you said, from some AI thing or some like collection of a whole bunch of different blogs on how to clean your house. She was in there doing it for so long. So she knew like all the tricks, all the time-saving hacks. And so I think people have so much innate value to offer the world based on those life experiences, and the one thing that I see happen a lot is sometimes they discount it because they're good at it. And so they're like, oh no, like, well, nobody wants to like learn how to clean their house, or like nobody. It's like, no, people really struggle with this. Just because it's easy for you doesn't mean it's easy for someone else. Like think back to where you were when you started. Was it super easy? Well, no, it would take me all day to clean a house. Okay, well now you're able to do it in 2 hours. So how in the heck do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great example. All right, I've got one more question for you, and that is that on the show, I like to have every guest ask a question to the audience. So if you could ask our audience anything, whether it's something you're curious about, something you want to kind of get everybody thinking about, what would that be?
So here's one question that I like to ask. When you make a mistake, what do you make it mean? And what impact does that meaning have on your business? And the reason why I say that is because there is so much about business that relies on you needing to make mistake after mistake after mistake. Even if you're following a plan, even if you're following a system, mistakes are going to happen. And the sooner you can let go of all of that baggage, that mental baggage around what it means about you as a person to make a mistake, the sooner you can let that go, the faster you're going to grow your business. And anytime you look at someone who is generating more money than you, it's not that they have more talent, it's that if they're making 10x the money, they've made 100x the mistakes. And so it's like, how can you, so that would be the question that I would say is, what do you make it mean when you make a mistake? And what impact does that meaning have on your business?
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I know I've said it on the podcast before even, that one of my favorite articles I've ever seen from Tim Ferriss was The Art of Letting Bad Things Happen. And realizing you have to become comfortable with something going wrong if you want to have more things go right. And so I think that's a super important skill to have and thing to realize, because it's not easy. You have to become more and more comfortable with it over time and realize that whether it went right or wrong or more wrong than maybe you thought it would have, it's like you would want to keep doing it later. And that's how you learn and that's how you improve. And definitely, I mean, I have, and I'm sure you have as well, like made so many mistakes, and that's why we're at where we are today.
Yes.
All right. Well, Caitlin, thanks so much for coming on the show. Before we get going, where else can people find you online?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram. That's where I'm the most active. My handle is Caitlin Bacher. And you can also take a peek at my website, CaitlinBacher.com. I've got some free resources there. You can listen to some of my older podcast episodes. So check it out.
All right. Thanks so much.